Welcome to Mind Your Business. And today we actually have something special. We're changing it up a little bit and we have an in studio guest today. So pull up a chair, grab a cup of coffee. Let's get started. Welcome back to Mind Your Business. I'm Steve Wagner, and today we're doing something a little different. We have a guest here, Mr. Bob Hothem
Mhm.
from Exit with Satisfaction.
That's right.
I've known Bob, what, 8, 9 years
Gosh, at
probably?
least, yeah, probably 8, 9 years
Quite a
going back.
while type
Yeah,
of thing and
exactly.
doing it. So Bob
Sure.
is coached. He has been a mentor for business people, entrepreneurs, and has been doing this for quite a long time. And so I thought this would be a good time to sit down and talk a little bit about some of the things that business people face when they're going through all the phases of their businesses from the start to
To the finish.
growth to the finish.
Yeah, precisely.
So
Well, thanks for having me today, Steve. I appreciate it very much.
So, Bob, kind of give us a little background, kind of where you started and how you got to where you are right now.
Well, that's a doggone good question because this goes back to the mid '70s when I graduated from Ohio State, and I went to work for a company called John Deere, and I started working with private business owners, and for the next 50 years or so, I've pretty much been working with private business all along, and I learned very quickly how emotional business can be for a private business owner. In the mid '70s, I had a one of my dealers who one day I was having conversation with, and he literally just broke down crying in his office, and I went, "Oh, wow. Haven't seen this before," but I've seen it a lot since, if you will. It's interesting how the emotion comes into play.
So, from John Deere, then you retired the first time
Well, I don't know if we call it retired.
or reworked your
Yeah, that's I guess that's a good way to look at it. Yeah, after about 20 years with Deere, I decided I'd do something else, and so I got involved as an owner in a direct marketing and advertising agency business and did that for a while, and then decided it was time to go back and coach field sales teams, and so I did that as U.S. fields in the print industry as a VP of sales for a couple of different large print organizations, and then eventually, when I turned 60, my late wife kind of challenged me to say, "You know, you've told private business owners how to do business all your life. Maybe you should start a business to see if you can be successful." And so I started a business called the Alternative Board, where we do peer advisory boards and individual coaching for private business owners. And you know that because you work
Mhm.
with us. We appreciate it very much.
Absolutely.
I built that business, and in March of last year, sold it and started this business called Exit with Satisfaction, where I'm working with private business owners. A lot of times they focus on the money, but where we start is more of a holistic approach. What are you gonna do with your time? What do your emotions look like? Do you identify yourself with the business? Or, are you a human doing or are you a human being? And so we spend a fair amount of time working on that. It's easy to get the valuation. It's a little bit tougher, if you will, to transition the business owner out of the business. In fact, when I had a client about 4 years ago sold his business, and about 3 months later, he called me and he says, "Call me back." And I said, "Okay." So I called him back and he said, "Call me back again." So I said, "Okay." A little strange, I thought. And he said, "Well, since I sold the business, my phone's not ringing. I wanted to make sure it was still working." Well, what had happened was the new business owner was now recognized by those customers. The old business owner, I think he felt he was put out to pasture. He really wasn't, but that's kind of the way he felt.
So, in your experience, I mean, clearly you've dealt with a lot of business owners and stuff like that.
Sure.
How does the mindset dictate success or failure?
That's a really interesting question. Henry Ford had an expression, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're generally right. And I have seen business owners that could not solve any problems. They just their mind just got in the way. And then there are other times that you kind of clear that out. As you've done in your wonderful series here, you clear your mind out, you get focused, you dial in where you're at. And all of a sudden, those things that were totally impossible we get taken care of very easily, but it's all right here. It's all right here.
So, when you come across, you sit across the table at lunch and you're talking to someone like this, we all have emotions and it all goes up
Sure,
and down. I
sure.
mean, if
Yeah.
depending, it could be hour by hour or day by day type of thing. So, When you come across these different level of emotions, how do you address them with the person?
Well, it's part science and part art, I guess. If someone is having what I would refer to as a very irrational, and again, it's very rational from their point of view, but sort of a irrational moment, kind of talk them through now. Help me understand, how did we get here? Why do you feel this way? Um, what are the challenges you're dealing with, and why do you feel they're insurmountable? Then what we try to do is have a discussion around, well, what's one thing you could do? One thing right now we can do to maybe turn this around. And what we find a lot of times is that the way the mind works is that once you have 3 or 4 or 5 challenges, everything just closes in. And what we try to do is push all that back away and say, okay, what's the most important thing? And oh, by the way, what we find is that if we can take care of that one most important thing, 2 or 3 other things then begin to take care of themselves. And then we develop, kind of a positive momentum, if you will, to get our mind back in the game.
So as you're going through this, you've seen a lot of different people. What do you find the mindset of people that are successful? I mean, just generally speaking, as a how they've cultivated it, and what's that mindset of those people that struggle in doing business? What are the like 3 or 4 factors that kind of like of all these people, these three things I see in so and so, and this,
Yeah.
and what are those factors?
A couple that quickly come to mind is that many people who are not as successful and have a tough time getting their hands around things tend to focus so much in what's right in front of them. I- I'm into drag racing, okay?
Right.
And, drag racers will say, when that light goes off and they head down the strip, they're always focusing on the horizon. They never focus on the wind light, if you will. And private business owners will just get caught up in what's right in front of them, and they lose track of the horizon of all the good things they've done. If there's one thing that I find as I work with these folks is that I have to remind people of all the good things that they've done. We as human beings always focus on the 1 or 2 or 3 things that are kinda in our craw right now. Okay, here are all the good things you've done. You've gotten this far along, if you will. So I think that's one area. I think secondly, private business owners that are successful have what I would call an abundance mentality. Now, you could look at it from a sales standpoint, but I look at it in total with the entire business. If an employee leaves, oh my gosh, the business can't succeed. No, we'll go find another employee. And often that employee is a better employee and picks up on things more quickly than the employee who left. Oh gosh, I'm short of cash. Well, no, there's cash available. We just haven't structured ourselves correctly. There's plenty of cash available. We haven't done a good job of selling. We haven't done a good job of collecting. We haven't done a good job of financing. So let's focus on that. So we have abundance available, if you will, from a cash standpoint. But most private business owners that struggle think that if they lose that one customer, then the lights are out. So there's this whole concept of abundance versus scarcity. And private business owners I know are successful have that abundance philosophy. And then I think another point that I run into is the successful private business owners in terms of mindset, in terms of financial, in terms of sales, however you want to measure it, are able to separate their personal life from their business life. What we find often is that if you were to identify an individual, the first thing you do is you describe, it's Steve who owns Tar Incorporated. No, it's Steve, a good friend of mine who's done a great job coaching, baseball players over the last 15 or 20 years. We tend to focus on all the things we do, and private business owners that are able to separate those two things are in a better place with their mind when Monday morning comes and, we're back into business. So those are a few that I've noticed.
Understood. So let's go into we're talking about transitions. So
Right,
so and the mindset and tackling those transitions,
right,
as running a business, I mean, from when you start to
right.
when you're established and you're trying to grow and to when you're basically selling the business and
Sure,
transitioning out,
sure.
what are some of the things that you are talking with the business owners in terms of those transitions? As start with the new person who's just starting a business and transitioning into that and then to growth.
Well, actually, I just had a conversation a couple of days ago with an individual who'd like to purchase a business, and we have one in mind at this point in time. And what I tell if they're just starting the business or they're in the process of purchasing a business, which as you know, I've worked with a few folks doing that, I'd say start with the end in sight. And people look at me and say, "What are you crazy? I'm not going to sell this business for 20, 25 years." Well, okay, but what's that end game? When I started my business, I had 4 objectives. I wanted to prove to myself that I could run a successful business. That was it happened. Second of all, I wanted to style a business where I could have an annuity of money month in and month out versus having to always go out and sing for my supper. I think, then the third one was I wanted to be able to develop enough cash flow to fund an endowment at the Ohio State University, and we have that money in place. We haven't funded it yet, but we have that money in place. Then fourth was to develop an asset that I could monetize at some point in time. And last March, I did monetize that. But all 4 of those objectives were put in place before I ever signed the agreement to become a franchisee of the alternative board. And I tell new business owners to do that. Now, we have a business owner who's been in business 15, 20 years, and they're kind of perplexed. The first thing I'll ask is, why did you get in business to start with? And they'll say, well, it looked like a good idea. Well, no, why did you get involved? Well, I did this, I did that, I did that. Okay, so what I try to do is bring them back as to why they got involved in business to start with, because a lot of times we lose sight of that, if you will. And then those business owners who are, I call it, they're the engineers on a train and they see that train station in the distance and they know how to run the train. They do a good job of running the train,
Right.
but how the hell do we stop it?
Right.
And so I'll say, well, how are we going to stop this train? And those kinds of things that we begin to talk about are okay, you're working 50, 60 hours a week. When that business is gone, what are you going to do? I had a client a number of years ago said that, well, I'll figure something out. I'll figure something out. Unfortunately, he went home and told his wife that. And she said, well, you cannot, he was going to close the business. You can't close that business until you figure that out, which was good for me because he basically was a client of mine for another year.
Right.
So thank his wife for that. But what are you going to do with your time? Oh, by the way, the example I used earlier where the guy kept calling me because his phone wasn't ringing. Well, who are you? And a lot of private business owners struggle with that in retirement. I have a neighbor, for example, that sold his dental practice 12, 13 years ago. And I know it's 12, 13 years ago he sold it, but he's been struggling ever since with what his identity was because he was the local dentist here in Centerville. And so those are the things we focus on because those are the things that mess your mind up. We'll figure the money out. That's secondary.
Right. Right. Well, you touched on something and it's kind of going through there, and that's who are you?
Right.
And, it's kind of anywhere in any process of running a business, or you've got to kind of get down to the core of who you are and what your strengths are. Explain, I mean, you're talking about the transition out, who are
Right.
you kind of go through. How do you help people start to uncover that? I almost think it's almost like layers of prejudice, ego, whatever, just buried down on that. You just don't know who that is. How do you help people uncover that?
Steve, your example is a beautiful one, and that is these things are layered in place. We've developed certain bias over 25, 30, 35 years. We think that no one can run the business as well as that we may have, so we've got to get beyond that. We run into situations where now I know you're going to sell the business and next Monday morning, but are you prepared to let go? If customers reach out to you and say, well, Fred doesn't run it as well as what you did, Bruce, are you prepared to say, "Yeah, but it's Fred's business now?" I mean, all that layers in place very well. And if you think about the number of years, number of business owners I'm working with right now have been in business 30, 35 years. They've been in business longer than they maybe have been married. They've been in business longer than any other specific thing they've ever done in their lives because they might have started a business in their mid-20s and now they're in their mid-50s, early 60s. And it's so entrenched. You're so entrenched in that. I mean, you're literally just it's like, the business just has you around the neck, if you
Right.
will, and you've gotta be able to start pushing away. Not easy at all. And then the other thing I said, well, that we do is, so what are you going to do in that free time? Have you looked into that? And we have exercises we take the business owners through to say, what do you wanna do? And what I actually ask them is, "What things don't you wanna do it in retirement or after you sell this business?" Some private business owners wanna start another business. I'm kinda that guy.
Right.
But wanna start another business, that's fine. Okay, we'll focus on that. Then our energies and our enthusiasm and all so forth focuses on that. I really get nervous when the guy says, "Well, I'm a member of the local country club and I'll play golf." Well, the dentist fellow that I mentioned did that for about 3 years, and he had a falling out with the local country club, and he hasn't
Right.
played golf since.
Oh, wow.
So, 9 years of no golf. Okay, there you go. So, it's a challenge, it's a challenge. And it's more of a challenge than people give it credit for.
Understood. Well, I mean, it's probably, their identity for 35 years or
That's what
whatever,
it is.
it's what they do, so they've got to really I heard the expression, it's not retirement, but it's rewirement.
Could be
You
rewirement, refirement, however you wanna
like
phrase it.
redefine to what you wanna do. I don't think you're ever gonna stop doing something, or you really should be doing something
Should be doing
to
something.
keep you stimulated and moving along and stuff like that. How do they of course, they've been thinking about business for 35 years. How do you get them to start thinking about, something else?
Yeah, well, we there's this and I just had this there's an old cliche, it's called the aha moment,
Mhm.
and I just had this aha moment yesterday with one of the private business owners I'm working with to transition was, "This is what's my business is worth. I actually have buyers." Yeah. It becomes real. And in his situation, you actually know the guy, but
Right,
in his situation, I said, "Okay, what are you going to do?" He said, "Yeah, I better get to working on that." That aha moment was, geez, yeah, this transition could actually happen. And then what am I going to do?
right.
And so I've got him working on an exercise right now. What kinds of things are you going to do? He's probably going to do a fair amount of volunteering. He's very much into the church, and there are a number of things that he can do to
Right,
focus in on that. And he actually even said during our session yesterday, he said, "Boy, there's this program and there's this program. I could get involved with those." I have another business owner that's sold his shares to his nephew about a year and a half ago now, and he had kinda lived I wouldn't say it I'm not suggesting that a private business owner spends a lot of time in his business is imbalanced, that's not it.
right,
But he had things. He was a bicyclist, he was a member of a New Optimist Club, those kinds of things. So those moved from, the background to the forefront, and his transition was beautiful. And he said something to me as well that really resonated with me when we were doing that transition, and that is, "I'm looking forward to the time when I won't take on other people's stress." And we as business
yes,
owners take, employees,
yes,
customers, suppliers, government, we take on everybody else's stress. And that really resonated with me because he said, "I'm looking forward to the time that I'm not taking anybody else's stress. And the only stress I have is the one that I may generate." And he gets a little stressed when it's raining. He can't ride his
right,
bicycle now.
right.
That's the kind of stress he has.
Those are champagne problems.
Yes,
That's nice that,
precisely,
that's nice
precisely.
that you kinda go
Yeah,
through,
very
so
much so. Yeah,
Kind of one last question going through as you get business owners, I've come across them and they're talking about being burnout
right,
and kind of what to do
right,
and kind of going through there. And, I kind of find it's almost kind of some aspects kind of losing their way. They don't have, again, that core, who are you and that mindset, but something that just talks about resonating. How do you walk these people through that process, of getting out from that burnout, they may be in the business for another couple of years, or something
right,
like that. And
right.
how do you teach them to cope with that?
Well, I know a lot of times it's defined as burnout, but it's not as much burnout as it is lack of direction. They kind of lose their focus. They kind of lose their way. They're getting hit from all sides. It's like a UFC fight. They're getting hit from
I would
all.
call misalignment.
I love that.
They're
That's a
not,
great Steve.
they're more and there's a misalignment going on. So,
Right.
you kind of have to figure out,
Well, I love your term misalignment because a lot of times, if you throw your knee or your hip out or something like that, you walk differently. Well, suddenly your back starts to hurt, your other hip hurts, and so forth. Misalignment is a beautiful, and that's what happens to private business owners. Everything just starts to hurt. So it's not really, I mean, it is burnout. It's
right,
defined as that.
right.
but they're just it's like beating your head against the wall, and you say, "Okay, let's get real," and you're using your example, which is a beautiful one. "Let's get realigned. Remember why we got involved with business. Okay, you wanna be out of this business in 3 years. Let's say, today is the end of May of 2026, and you wanna be out of the business by the end of May, we'll say, of 2028. Okay, let's go to that. What success look like? Checks in the bank or the keys are turned over. Okay, let's go backwards now.
Right.
By this time, we have to have this done. By this time, we have to have this done. By this time, we have to have this done. And oh, by the way, here's where we start."
Right.
And so we kind of help lay out a pathway, which then kind of helps re-energize, because burnout is just you lose energy. You just lose energy for things.
Right.
And people will say to me, "Well, I got to do something that I have a passion for." Well, I challenge that. You may have a passion for something, but do you have the energy? You know, do
Understood.
you have the energy for it? Because a lot of times, you're very passionate. You really like to do it, but your passion sometimes, if you don't have the energy, then burnout comes into play because I'd really love to do that. I need to do a better job. And then you start beating yourself up. You start beating yourself up. And then, obviously,
I think
because you don't have
passion,
the energy.
there's like a two parts of passion. Passion is the short term that
Yeah.
keeps you going, but you got to have perseverance with that to something that you're willing to do
Good approach. Yeah.
day in and day out. It's the doing the little things all the time,
Sure.
to couple. And the passion helps you kind of work through to keep going, but
Mm.
you got to have that systematic structure of kind of keep going at it as you do, that type of stuff,
Sure.
going through there and doing it. So now that where you're at,
Right.
you've dealt with all the array from all the business going to go through there. If you had someone walking up to you and some person say, "Bob, I want to start a business. What do I mean, just kind of sum this up and just kind of close this out a little bit. What are maybe about 4 or 5 things that you'd say, okay, this is what you need to do. You need to look at these things. You need to have certain
Yeah.
stuff. What are those things that
Okay.
you would tell them?
The first two things have nothing to do with any business. The first thing is, generally speaking, these people have had a job, a W-2 somewhere.
Mhm.
Okay. The first thing is, are you prepared to not get a paycheck every other Friday? Are you prepared not to take a paycheck if you've got a little cash flow problem? Are you prepared to surround yourself with people who will enhance the business? Because a lot of people want to get involved with a private business because they want to make all the decisions. Well, not everybody's good at everything. I mean, what a fellow once told me, and I always took it to heart. Private business owners got to do about 11 or 12 different things,
Right.
and they're good at 3 or 4. And then they kind of plod along with the other 7 or 8 instead
Right.
of surrounding themselves with the right person. So the first thing is, what is your mindset? Back to mind your business, right?
Right.
What is your mindset? It's got to change, and here's why. And you're going to run into challenges. And people who look at me about running a business, they think it's linear. We're going to start here, and we're going to go this way. No, it
Right.
goes this way and
Right.
back and forward and so forth. So, number one, what's your mindset there? The second thing I say, do you have the buy-in from the family on the home front? I've worked with a number of private business owners, especially with the alternative board, because I validate and help
Right.
the owners get started,
Right.
that after about 5 or 6 months, they're fighting a battle on 2 flanks. Patton said you can't do that, although he did it often, it was
Right.
successful.
Right.
Flank number 1, he was out there trying to find customers, build the business. Flank number 2 was the children or the wife saying, "Why don't we get a paycheck every other Friday?
Right.
Why don't we take vacation like we used to? Why don't we? Why don't we? Why don't we? Why don't we?" I tell them the second thing before we ever look at a business is, are you square on the home front? Because if you're not square on the home front, that'll weight you down worse than the professional side of it, if you will.
Right.
So those are the two things we start before we ever look for a business. And then I think the third thing is that a lot of people will come to me and say, "I know this or I know that." And our focus then is, let's take an inventory of your skills. The young man I spoke to yesterday, for example, is very good at project management.
Right.
He comes out of the pharmaceutical industry,
Right.
doesn't want to go back to pharmaceutical industry. And actually, the business I have him looking at is probably in the trades. but his leadership capability and what he's showing there, his project management ability, his problem solving fits into that industry. So
Right.
don't get caught up on the fact that it's a specific industry. What happens to Betsy, Steve, when you started your business, what did you know about asphalt?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Zero. Nothing.
0. Zip
It's
0,
like,
nada. But you knew how to put the key business components together to have a successful business as you've had for the last 30 plus years. And so then when we get around that and we get that skills inventory in place, then we go look for businesses we think are aligned. You're familiar with one of our business owners that moved out of the pharmaceutical sales business and bought
right.
a company in the agricultural market.
Right.
He didn't grow up on a farm. He didn't know anything about agriculture,
Right.
but he's a good leader. He could see the potential of that particular business going forward and the kinds of things that he could see growth that the current owner didn't have. And so he ended up in that market. And you'd say he was in pharmaceuticals all of his life and he ended up in that market, but he's being very successful, if you will. So then we align that. And then eventually, if it all comes together, obviously they buy the business and then we remind them when they get started, okay, we committed to doing this, 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 and this. And oh, by the way, 6, 8 weeks, it'll be a challenge. Make sure you're still square on the home
Right.
front. Make sure you remember
Right.
why you started this. In fact, the other thing I have them do is what I would call, we write what's called a personal vision statement.
Right.
If you think of a bicycle, there are two wheels. And a lot of times as private business owners, especially after we buy a business and get started, we pedal really hard, but we really don't steer. So we look at the company vision, we look at the company objectives, but what's your personal vision? And think of that as the steering wheel on the bicycle or the tiller on the bicycle. I guess they call it tiller. But anyway, the tiller on the bicycle.
Right.
If you don't steer that baby, you're going to fall over or you're going to go in circles or whatever. So we start out with the personal vision. And I always, especially with a new business owner, okay, where are we at on the personal vision? Remember why we did this and so on, because it can close in fast
Right.
on you. So, those are the some of the things we work on.
Understood.
Yeah.
Well, Bob, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate
Well,
it was a good
thanks.
conversation.
Thanks for the opportunity. I always enjoy working with you, Steve, and I appreciated you inviting me in.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.